Welcome and thank you to the East Cheam Rambling Society. My talk is Ramblings of an Old Pro, and I hope that not many of you are at Bournemouth because you'll have heard it all before. Anyhow, as you all know more about the lad himself and his TV and radio career, I shall talk more about the stage appearances of 1958 and 1961 when I had the pleasure of supporting him. However, I'll tell you first how I got involved with him, with Hancock's Half Hour, in fact. I'd spent some time in repertory and toured, and I'd done a West End play for Peter Hall, and occasionally during that time thinking that walking on in television might be the stairway to stardom, etc., and I'd be discovered, I had walked on in television, mainly through an agent called Eric Blythe, who specialised in walk-ons and small parts occasionally. And one day I was sent with several others to read for Duncan Wood. 4 of us were chosen for the rep company: Leslie Smith, Richard Stadman, both of whom were in the television, the video you saw just now, and Bruce Whiteman. Out of that bunch, I seemed to linger longer and do more than anyone else. I don't quite know why, but still it was very nice. I was in 22 of Hancock's Half Hours, plus the Budgerigar sketch, and played parts ranging from a burglar to a football player. That was in my butch days. And from a vicar to a shh in a library in The Missing Page. The first part I played in 1957 was, I read in Roger Wilmot's book, an exotic creature called the Crimson Alligator. And I haven't a clue about it. I can't remember anything about it. There were 4 of us and we all had exotic names, but what it was about I don't know. But I can remember the second one I did, which was the amusement arcade. And this might very well have been my last, because I didn't know that Kenneth Williams had been dropped for his funny voices and amongst other things. And my line just lent itself to a funny voice. "How do you propose to close the amusement arcade?" it was. At the read-through, Tony, Alan and Ray looked up with an aye, and then laughed and all was well. I was in 7 of that 13 series, and some little more than a shh or a walk-on. Although I did fiddle as brilliantly as Nigel Kennedy, I think, in There's an Airfield at the Bottom of the Garden. Also in the quartet was Evelyn Lund, who I'll mention later. The best part, I suppose, I played was the young married man in The 12 Angry Men. Anyhow, it's interesting to see the videos now, because one's forgotten they're a long, long while ago. Sometimes things come back, and tonight seeing that one downstairs, a lot of that came back, and it was great fun. And often, when you had finished your scene, and remember, they weren't recorded, I mean, these were live shows. When you'd finished your scene, you were allowed to go. In fact, you often were encouraged to go and clear out of the studio. There was nowhere for you to sit, etc. So I didn't see them, and a lot of them, because they weren't recorded, I have never seen. The BBC obviously didn't realise the potential of repeats in those days. Also, there were great hazards in tele-recording. A children's serial I was in was being tele-recorded as we performed live in the studio, and the technique was that there was a cine camera aimed at a television set. Well, in this particular episode, a large moth flew in front of the camera and the television set, and fluttered and flit, and ruined the recording. I mean, it was just unusable. And the whole series bit the dust, you know, it could never be shown again. So there were great complications. And the Alpine Holiday is one of the early, I think the first series, they only recorded the Alpine Holiday, and that was recorded for archive purposes and just to study it. And that was shown, in fact, in the second series, I think, in '57, when one was cancelled because of Tony's illness. However, after my first series, Eric Blythe, the agent, who was a very fair and kind man, thought that if you'd worked, it was someone else's turn. And he didn't push me in any other comedy directions. I think the only other show I did was one educating Archie when I worked with Irene Handel for the first time. So it was back to the odd walk-on and the theatre until Hancock's half hour started again, and I was asked for. Duncan was very good to me and suggested me to other light entertainment directors, and I worked with lots of people, including Eric Sykes, Frankie Howard, Benny Hill. So having done quite a few of the TV shows, one day I was asked to go to the Prince of Wales Theatre because Tony was about to tour. At the end of the tour, he was going to do the Royal Variety Performance. This was 1958. I was ushered into the bar. Auditions are often held in bars. They're usually closed, I might add. No temptation to tipple at Perrier. When Tony saw me, he said, "What are you doing here?" When he knew, he said, I'd love to have you in the show." And so, after some very casual rehearsals, and he had done most of the sketches before, we set off for Gloucester. We were playing a combination of theatres and ABC cinemas. Diana Dawes had preceded us in a show. The show consisted of variety acts and sketches. His first appearance in Homburg and Trademark Overcoat was accompanied musically by me as the conductor in the pit, and I played very, very fast. He was very annoyed and remonstrated with me, and after a row, went off, came on again, and I played at a funereal pace. He dismissed me, then took off his coat to reveal a frilly shirt identical to Johnny Vivian's and Les Ward of Les and Albert Ward, who were on the show, and he did sketches as well. And they went into this terrible juggling act, which was very funny, of course. The next sketch was the open-air theatre, and he entered in black tights, white floppy blouse, carrying a battered suitcase. Putting it on a bench, he opened the case, produced a straight blonde wig with a fringe, and I yelled out from the audience, "Aren't you married to Billy Wright?" The Beverly Sisters were currently very popular. So it continued with him doing Hamlet, or trying to, Richard III, etc., and I barracking from the stalls, and various other hazards from Johnny, Les and Albert. The first half finished with him as the crooner in zoot suit, suede shoes, and references to his Globe artichokes. Johnny sat lugubriously at the piano, often disgusted. His speciality was disdainful looks and reactions. Tony had his big solo spot at the end of the second half when he did the Pathé News, impressions of Mr. Christian, and George Arliss, etc. I watched many times in the wings, rolling about whilst waiting to take the curtain call. The show was a great hit, because Tony was at the peak of popularity. The theatres were absolutely packed, and we played twice nightly everywhere we went, and it was a fantastic experience. The day after the opening in Gloucester, we assembled at the theatre to add the Budgie sketch to the show. Tony Allen Ray and Totty Truman Taylor, who was in many of the Hancock shows, we read it, but no one really was in charge, and no one quite knew how to work it in the theatre. It had been done originally on television with Irene Handel, but the theatre was very different. We assembled several days, looked at the script, had coffee and a chat, and then went back to the digs. At the end of the week, Totty went back to London. And then that appeared to be that, although the object was to get it ready for the Royal Variety Performance. It seemed to have bitten the dust. I wasn't in on any of the discussions, but a few weeks later, Evelyn Lund, who I mentioned, who played the cello, I think, in There's an Airfield at the Bottom of, joined us as Totty was no longer free. Evelyn was getting on a bit, a lovely lady who'd been a very successful actress in Ireland, but now mainly did walk-ons, and a way had to be found to present the sketch. And partly due to my suggestions, and in fact I named the lady, Evelyn Lund, the character who had previously been unnamed, and I called her Miss Snitterby. The sketch opened with Miss Snitterby leading on the vicar to a covered birdcage in a spotlight. After a few niceties, the vicar asks, "And how's your little budgerigar?" Whereupon Miss Snitterby says, "Ah, my little beauty," uncovers the cage, spotlight fades, and the curtains open to reveal Tony as Budgie, in an enormous cage, strutting up and down on his perch, fluttering, hitting his head on the bell, and other bird-like movements. We made our exit and did the rest of the dialogue over a mic off stage. The sight of Tony as a budgie brought the house down, and it was a triumph. Cuts and alterations were made to improve it, and we did it for several performances. However, Tony wasn't entirely happy, and it was dropped again. I think part of the trouble was Evelyn, who was a stage actress. She wasn't used to mics and hadn't done much radio. She was acting her socks off in the wings, gesticulating and coming and going into the mic, very much like Singing in the Rain, actually. And that was a great problem. It was also very difficult to time the laughs. We were off stage, and it wasn't always easy to hear. Anyhow, the sketch, which had been written into the programme and was an additional item, I'm sorry, it had never been written into the programme at all. It was an additional item. It was dropped yet again, not just from the show, but from the Royal Variety performance. He would do the more familiar crooner sketch. I was very disappointed, of course. But came the Saturday before the Monday of the Variety performance. He decided to try it at the first performance. Again, the audience loved it, and during the second performance I was told we would do it on the Monday, but with Hattie Jakes instead of Evelyn. Hattie was in a show called London Laughs at the Palladium at that time with Harry Seacombe, and so she was already in the Variety performance. And it was fairly easy for her to do it, as most of it could be read off stage. It was Bernard Delfont's first Royal Variety performance, and not wanting to upset Her Majesty or the Church, my vicar became a scoutmaster. This was 1958. I think things have changed a bit since then. So I made my debut before Her Majesty in long khaki shorts and bare knees. The sketch was a great success. And unfortunately, this was the year before they started televising the command performances, and only extracts up to that time were done on radio. The show ended with the companies of Fair Lady, Where's Charlie, The Merry Widow, and London Laughs, all swirling to I Could Have Danced All Night. Over 500 people. But without me. Ah! Pardon? Ah, yes. I wasn't in the programme either because of this sort of fluctuating in and out of the sketch, and so that was that. But Tony inscribed my programme, "Sorry about the billing, see you in the park," referring to the open-air sketch. He said, "I must give you some expenses, Alec," and I said, "No, it's okay, it was an honour." But he insisted, and eventually I was rewarded. Every time I saw him on the TV shows, he'd say, "Alec, I must give you your expenses." And 3 years later, on the final day of the 61 tour, "Come to my dressing room," he said, and gave me a cheque for £10. This was in Oxford, where an additional act was added, and they were the Springfields. It was during that week they rushed up to town to record their first hit. Before the second tour, Johnny Vivian had made quite a name for his lugubrious reactions in a series called Laugh Line, a show where actors posed as in a cartoon and then were rearranged by a celebrity panel with an alternative punchline. I did several of them too. Anyhow, on the tour in 61, we were travelling together on the train, the company manager, Tony, and Johnny Vivian. And Johnny was sitting on the gangway, when suddenly a couple of people came over and looked at Johnny and said, "Laugh Line," and roared with laughter and went off. Didn't see Tony at all, not a word or recognition. And when they departed, he said, "I might as well go home." But anyhow, he found it very funny and was fine about it. Again, it was a very successful tour. The only comment one sometimes, or criticism one sometimes heard, "It's wonderful, but where's Sid?" Where indeed, for after this tour, we came back to do the last BBC series without Sid. In this series were, of course, the classic radio hams, Blood Donor, Bedsitter, and the Bowmans, which Alan and Ray regard as their favourite. After touring and often tatty dressing rooms, I was elevated to the luxury of a star dressing room. There were just the two of us in this particular show, the Bedsitter, and I was never seen on screen. To save Tony the strain of camera rehearsal, Duncan asked me to stand in for him so they could line up the cameras on me. It was a weird experience reading his lines and being watched in the studio by him.